We are very quickly going to review the book Propaganda and Slogans, the Political Poster in Soviet Ukraine. And I want you to take good care of the cover, especially this poster, which we'll be discovering at the end. And I'm going to read it to you. Pohovajte ta stavajte, kajdani porvite, I vražoju zloju krovju volju okorpite. And that's from a poem, My Testament, by Taras Shevchenko. And we're going to get to that by the end, and we'll see how hypocritical it is for the Soviet poster in Ukraine to use this message, which is not a pro-Soviet message. In fact, it's a pro-Ukrainian independence message. Propaganda I Lozuniai. Propaganda, the political poster in Soviet Ukraine, 1919 to 1921. So this one is called Ukraine's Torments. So the poster was published by the political department of the Russian Soviet Socialist Republic. Different panels depict Ukraine under the Tsar, Alexander Kerensky, the provisional government of 1917, Pavlo Skoropadsky, who was supported by Germany in 1918, Simon Petliura, the military commander of forces fighting for an independent Ukraine, and General Denikin, who led the White Armies in southern Ukraine and the Kuban. Note that Skoropadsky is surrounded by German troops who maintain his power. Petliura is associated with the greedily exploitative is associated with the greedy exploitative Kirkle, or rich peasant. There are French and Polish flags in the background, a reference to Petliura's efforts to obtain Western intervention. The Soviet regime is represented by the happy Russian worker and Ukrainian peasant, who join hands in a land of plenty where food and flowers abound. This panel contains a poem by an official Soviet versifier, Demian Bidny. The Russians saved us. If not for the Soviet Russians, we would all have been left barefoot and naked, weeping on the Lord's land and suffering from the Lord's oppression. So this was published in the USSR, but the poster is in the Ukrainian language. This is how the enemies of the USSR inside of Ukraine are depicted. The hireling Petliura sold Ukraine to the Polish lords. 1920, Kiev. The text reads, the hireling Petliura sold Ukraine to the Polish lords. The lords have burned and robbed Ukraine. Death to the Lord and Petliurites. The poster's intent is to discredit the military commander Simon Petliura, who fought for an independent Ukraine. And in the struggle against the Red Army, sought intervention from Poland and the West. I love this one. It's brutal. And again, everything I'm showing you, this is all Soviet propaganda to encourage Ukraine to support the Soviet Union. And look at how they do it time and time again. It's not by encouraging Ukrainians. It's not by seeking to strengthen the idea of brotherhood. Even though the first one we saw had the Ukrainian and the Russian peasants holding hands, the message, which I will read again, was not pro-Ukrainian and pro-Russian. It was, the Russians saved us. If not for the Soviet Russians, we would all have been left barefoot and naked, weeping on the Lord's land and suffering from the Lord's oppression. Without the Soviet Russians, we would all have been left weeping on the Lord's land and suffering from the Lord's oppressions. So in this one of my favorite, the title is Vagrant Lords, or Which is Closer, Kyiv or Warsaw? The Western interventionalists have disembarked and ask, are we far from Kyiv? In the boat, they say they fly the Polish flag and carry the banner saying, all power to the landowners and capitalists. A sign on the gallows reads, for peasants and workers. The peasant replies, who knows? Maybe with what you're bringing on the boat, Warsaw would be closer than Kyiv. But if you hit a rock, you'll fall apart. And that's the idea. That maybe interventionalism from Warsaw could save you, only could save you. You could only possibly be free from the Soviet Union if Warsaw intervenes. But Warsaw is far away. What happens if you hit a rock? And that's the idea, that your brother, your abusive brother from the USSR is there to help you and is your only chance. If not, you'll drown. I love this one. Join the Red Cavalry. The text reads, the Red Army has destroyed Mamortov, Shkoro, Denkin. It beat the Lords and Petliura. Now we have to destroy Wrangel's remnants. Workers and peasants join the ranks of the Red Cavalry, in bold. Look at this poster. Red in politics is very aggressive. The Republican Party, which is red, doesn't typically use red banners like that, shocking, to illustrate their point, because red is aggressive. Look how aggressive this poster is. Join this aggressive movement. Join the Red Cavalry. Very aggressive. Very powerful image. But are they the good guys, or are they the bad guys? And we'll see. We'll see that here. The last battle. After destroying the last snake of the counter-revolution, Baron Wrangel, the workers and peasants can take up peaceful work. Peaceful work? Look here closely. Notice the deliveries of grain to the Red Army. Peaceful work is supporting the Red Army. Supporting this militant organization. That's what the Russians mean when they say peaceful work. Is supporting the military establishment. Who are the good guys and who are the bad guys? Take a look at this poster. And I want you to tell me from your first impressions, are the people on top the good guys? Or are the people on top the bad guys? I've asked 3 priests this question. Each one of them, and a Jewish rabbi, 2 priests, 1 rabbi, each one of them said, this is the bad guy. No. According to the Soviet Union, this guy slaughtering these elders is actually the good guy. The guy with the sword, the guy on the horse, who's slaughtering these innocent, unprotected people. That is the good guy. And that's what the Soviet Union wants you to believe. Woe to whoever does not carry the struggle through to the end. The Ukrainian Socialist Soviet Republic figures prominently in this and later posters. Its initials here are USSR. Notice the aristocratic-looking Polish lord in archaic uniform. The scenery in the background is more typical of Western Ukraine or Poland. The Red Army invaded Poland because Lenin had hopes of detonating a revolution in Germany. However, the venture failed, and the army was driven back by Pilsudski's forces. Note that the Ukrainian Socialist Soviet Republic, USSR, is credited as the government issuing the poster. The slogan, "Proletarians of all countries unite," is seen in many of the posters. And this was published by the Odessa Gubierna's Department of Publishing. So that's the really sad part. They made their propaganda, their Soviet propaganda, the Russians did, and they had Ukrainian artists, Ukrainian traders, actually illustrate these depictions, which put them on the bottom and held them back. This is just pure communism. I want you to look at this poster. It's going to be difficult to understand because you and I, if we were to see a poster like this, we would not understand it. But you have to understand how twisted the Soviet communists were in the 1920s and beyond to this day. The peasant's truth is painful, while the Lord's is tricky. 1920 in Kharkiv. Published. Quotation from the Ukrainian writer Ivan Kotlyarsky. Violent group action is applauded as the simple and correct solution. Conversations merely lead to confusion and the bamboozlement of simple peasants. Note that the Ukrainian Socialist Soviet Republic, USSR, appears at the top of the poster, as well as the slogan, "Proletarians of all countries unite." And this is printed in Kharkiv, where, by the way, Konstantin Kochelenko's Management in Times of War is also published. And then we have this one. Remember, at the beginning I told you to pay attention to this poster. Pochowajcie ta stawajcie, I wrażoju krowiu woliu. No. Pochowajcie ta stawajcie, kajdany porwite, I wrażoju zoju krowiu woliu ukorpite. And this translates to, bury me, then rise again. Rip and chuck your chains. Stand and water freedom with blood from tyrants' veins. And this is used as a pro-Soviet poster. And in the 1920s, in the early 1930s, Taras Shevchenko, the author of this beautiful verse, would be used as a pro-Soviet figure, when in fact he was almost exclusively a pro-Ukrainian nationalist figure who viciously fought for an independent Ukraine, free from Russian aggression. But here he's being used to promote Russian aggression, to promote Soviet aggression. Bury me, then rise again. Rip and chuck your chains. Stand and water freedom with blood from tyrant veins. The full context is the poem My Testament by Taras Shevchenko. When I die, let me pull it up. When I am dead, bury me in my beloved Ukraine, my tomb upon a grave mound high amid the spreading plain, so that the fields, the boundless steeps, the Dnieper's plunging shore, my eyes could see, my ears could hear the mighty river roar. When from Ukraine the Dnieper bears into the deep blue sea the blood of foes, then I will leave these hills and fertile lands. I'll leave them all and fly away to the abode of God. And then I'll pray. But till that day, I know nothing of God. Bury me, then rise again. Rip and chuck your chains. Stand and water freedom with blood from tyrant veins. And in the new family, the family of the free, with softly spoken, kindly word, remember also me. None of this is Soviet nationalism. None of this is communism. All of this is Ukrainian nationalism. And we see here how it has been totally ripped out of context and used to motivate a Soviet revolution. There are many more posters. Many more. And I'm going to get into the famine. And you know the story of the Great Famine of 1920. I'm sure you do. When this was a real famine, unlike the Great Holodomor, this was a real famine where still Ukraine's grain was seized. 10 years before the Holodomor, 15 years before the Holodomor, Ukraine's grain was seized. People died and struggled. And the posters that they saw as they were dying and they struggled were like this. Peasant, save your brother workers from hunger. Hand in the food tax. Look how brutal that is. Look how desperate that man looks. And yet the Ukrainian people were desperate. The Ukrainian people could not afford the food tax. You would be arrested. You could be executed for withholding from that food tax, even if your family was struggling, even if your family was starving. Thank you. I'm Matt McFarlane. Thank you for listening to me. Have a great day.